Beneath the ancient sky, when the desert sands still whispered their tales through the wind, there existed an inscription on clay, a record of kings who ruled for 240,200 years, a number that defies every measure of human time. This was the Sumerian King List, a chronicle many scholars believe holds the legacy of beings not of this earth, the Anunnaki. Carl Jung once said, "Man is not formed by the present alone, but also by ancient memories that sleep within the collective unconscious." Perhaps within the lines etched by the Sumerian civilization, we're gazing into that very mirror of the unconscious, where gods, prophets, and humankind merge into one within the eternal dream of time. Tonight, as you listen to this story, allow your mind to drift gently between the realms of history and myth. For it may be amidst the whispers of long-forgotten kings that you discover something, not only about the origins of humanity, but about the deepest nature of your own soul. History is not merely a record of events, but a reflection of the human soul through time. In the dim glow of an ancient oil lamp, history ceases to be a dry sequence of events printed in books. It becomes the breath of ancient souls, the heartbeat of a collective memory whispering from a distant past. And then, from the fractured layers of clay buried deep in Mesopotamia, a fragment emerges, the Sumerian King List, a register of rulers carved on clay tablets more than 4,000 years old. At first glance, it seems to be nothing more than an administrative document. The names of kings, the cities they ruled, and the length of their reigns. But what has confounded scholars for generations is this. The first 8 kings were said to have ruled for a total of 241,200 years. A number that defies every biological law, yet it was engraved with the solemn authority of an official chronicle. Not poetry, not mythology, but a record. Carl Jung once said, "The symbols of mythology are not of the past, they are the language of the soul." Perhaps within those impossible numbers, the Sumerians were speaking that very language, the language of the soul, a tongue that modern reason has long forgotten. Modern science often marks the beginning of history around 3000 BCE, when writing first appeared. But the Sumerian King List challenges that boundary. It suggests that even before the dawn of recorded history, there existed another era, a time when kingship descended from heaven. This phrase engraved at the very beginning of the tablet is more than a religious statement. It is a metaphysical declaration, a way for the Sumerians to express that order, authority, and human civilization did not rise from the earth, but descended from the heavens. From a higher consciousness, it marks the moment when history became the mythologization of the human mind, when humanity began to feel that all greatness within must have a divine origin. Thus, history is no longer a straight line, but a spiral of memory, circling around the belief that we come from elsewhere. If we read it with reason, it feels absurd, but if we look through the Jungian lens, another layer unfolds. The number 200 may not measure physical time, but rather the duration of divine consciousness within humanity. Carl Jung called this realm the collective unconscious, a vast memory beyond the individual self and containing the archetypes, spiritual prototypes that have existed since the dawn of humankind. Perhaps the Sumerians were describing the reign of these divine archetypes within the human psyche, stretching across hundreds of thousands of years before we fully awakened into modern consciousness. Imagine this. The first 8 kings were not 8 men, but 8 symbols of spiritual evolution. Each dynasty represented a stage of awareness, from instinct, creation, and structure to prophecy and decline. In that sense, 241,200 years becomes not the measure of physical time, but of psychic time, the time of the soul's evolution. And then, carved at the very end of the clay tablet, comes a line that echoes like the sigh of the universe. Then the flood swept over. A brief, cold sentence, yet it carries the full weight of loss. In a single moment, the entire world of these semi-divine kings was erased. It was not only a physical flood, but a metaphor for the collapse of ancient consciousness. the transition of humanity from the age of myth to the age of reason. Jung once wrote, "Every myth is an expression of the deepest conflicts within the human psyche." From that perspective, the Great Flood represents the fall of a collective awareness, the loss of heavenly kingship within the human soul. When the waters receded, humanity awoke, but what remained were only faint memories, fragments of myth, tales of kings who lived for impossibly long ages. As we sit and listen to this story under the gentle stillness of night, what truly stirs within us is not the number 241, 200 years, but a strange sense of familiarity, as if we have known these things before, somewhere within a dream. Jung called this anamnesis, the rebirth of memory, a moment when the human mind touches the deep layers of the collective unconscious, and ancient memories rise again like spirits yearning to be remembered. Perhaps the Sumerian King List is not merely an ancient record, but a key to awaken the ancestral memory of humankind. Each line carved in clay is a note in the symphony of the unconscious, a quiet invitation to return to the spiritual origin within ourselves. At its deepest level, the Sumerian King List does not merely recount the past of a civilization. It tells the story of the awakening of human consciousness, from kingship descending from heaven through 200 years of reign to the Great Flood. It mirrors the life cycle of the human spirit, born in myth, organized in order, destroyed, and then reborn. If we read it with the eyes of a historian, we see a series of names and numbers, but if we read it with the mind of a seeker, we see our own reflection. Modern humans, lost between memory and forgetting, and yearning to rediscover the ancient light that once illuminated the soul. Perhaps the Sumerian King List was never meant to be understood, only felt. For within each carved symbol lies the voice of an age, when the mind and the cosmos were still one, when heaven and humankind still conversed. As Carl Jung once said, "He who looks outside dreams, he who looks inside awakes." And perhaps when we gaze upon the names of long-departed Sumerian kings, we are not merely looking into history. We are awakening from our own dream, a dream that has lasted 200 years, where the Anunnaki, mythology, and human memory merge into one eternal breath of the soul. Part Diska, the Sumerian King List, reality or metaphor. The more we search for the origins of man, the more we are drawn into the labyrinth of myth. Amid the arid deserts of Mesopotamia, where the wind still carries the whispers of millennia, lie clay tablets inscribed with the names of kings who once ruled this ancient land. But the strangest thing about these tablets is that the list is not written as poetry or myth. There are no gods, no magic, no allegories, only names of kings, cities, and years of reign. A plain administrative document, simple and cold, known as the Sumerian King List. And it is precisely this coldness that makes it so inexplicable. For the numbers engraved by the Sumerians utterly defy reality. 800 years, 36,000 years, 43,200 years. No one could live that long. No civilization could remain unbroken for such spans of time. Yet all these numbers follow a perfect pattern, each one a multiple of the Sar, a Sumerian unit of time equal to 3,600 years, a sacred number symbolizing the cosmic cycle. When numbers become symbols. On the surface, Sar was merely a unit of measurement, but through the lens of symbolism, it meant much more. 3,600 represents the number of completion, for 360 is a circle, the symbol of wholeness and eternity, and 10 times that becomes the amplification of perfection, a closed cycle of the cosmos. Carl Jung once said, "Numbers are archetypes of order which form the basis of consciousness." Perhaps to the Sumerians, numbers were not tools for counting, but the language of the universe, a way to express the sacred that words could not reach. So when they wrote that Alulim ruled for 20,800 years, perhaps they were not describing literal years, but 4 cosmic cycles of divine kingship, a symbol of stability, order, and sacred power enduring through time. From Jung's perspective, the numbers in the Sumerian King List represent the architecture of the collective unconscious, humanity's attempt to model eternity using the limited language of form. Thus, what seems irrational becomes logical on a deeper level, the logic of the soul. An administrative record of the impossible. What astonishes scholars most is that this text is not presented as a myth. There are no lines such as "the gods descended" or "the heavens opened." Instead, the writing is strictly administrative in tone. Alulim of Eridu became king. He ruled for 28,800 years. Alalgar ruled for 36,000 years. Then Eridu fell, and kingship was taken to Bad Tibera. This dry, direct style, as if describing the dynastic succession of an actual nation, makes it difficult to categorize as mythology. And therein lies the paradox, a text so illogical, written in a tone so rational. Carl Jung called this the paradox of the unconscious, the place where irrational symbols arrange themselves in perfect order, for the collective unconscious is always seeking meaning amid chaos. Perhaps the Sumerian King List is the result of that very process, a civilization's attempt to translate its mythic memory into the language of reason. It stands at the threshold between myth and history, the moment when human consciousness first learned to rewrite its dreams into text. When myth becomes history. One detail has kept archaeologists from dismissing the list entirely. Some of the figures mentioned were real historical kings. After the fateful line, "Then the flood swept over," the list continues with post-Diluvian rulers, including Gilgamesh of Uruk, who later became the central hero of the Epic of Gilgamesh. Archaeological findings at Uruk, along with clay tablets documenting Gilgamesh's reign, suggest he was not merely a legend, but a real king who lived around 2700 BCE. This revelation raises a fascinating question. If Gilgamesh, a name within the king list, was real, then were the kings before him merely metaphors, or were they mythologized reflections of real beings, perhaps the ones who came from the heavens that Sumerian texts so often describe? Carl Jung once wrote, "Myth is the natural and indispensable intermediate stage between unconscious and conscious cognition." Myth, he explained, is the bridge between dream and awareness. Perhaps the Sumerians were recording genuine memories, memories too vast, too ancient, too mystical, to be conveyed through ordinary language. Thus, they took the shape of myth, but myth that still carried the seed of truth. Making the unreal real, to the modern mind, the Sumerian King List seems fantastic, but to the ancient Sumerian mind, it was sacred truth. For in their worldview, heaven and earth were not separate. Gods and men were not two distinct species, but two levels of the same consciousness. Kingship descending from heaven might not mean divine beings literally descending from the stars, but rather the awakening of divine order within humanity. In Jungian terms, this was the union of the self and the ego, the merging of the cosmic unconscious with personal awareness. The first kings, Alulim, Alalgar, Enmenluana, were not merely historical figures but symbols of spiritual stages in humanity's self-realization. 28,800 years does not mark a reign, but the span between awakenings, the intervals between humanity's great resurrections of consciousness and when the flood of the unconscious returns. Then the flood swept over, mankind once again forgets and begins anew. When reason touches the unconscious. What makes the Sumerian King List truly remarkable is not its factual accuracy, but its metaphysical longing. It is perhaps the first document in human history to express the desire for immortality, a yearning to capture the eternal order of the cosmos in written form. For when humans began to write, they were not only preserving information, they were trying to preserve eternity. Within each line of impossible years lies the fear of impermanence, the silent prayer that what we build shall not be washed away. Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." Perhaps the Sumerian King List is a map of fate, humanity's attempt to turn the unconscious into the conscious by inscribing it upon clay, the matter of earth itself, symbol of stability and eternal memory. Conclusion: the threshold between two worlds. Thus, the Sumerian King List should not be seen merely as history nor dismissed as myth. It is the union of both, a mirror reflecting the moment when humanity crossed the boundary between sacred unconsciousness and rational awareness. Like dawn breaking through mist, the list is both real and dreamlike, logical yet surreal. It does not simply record the reigns of kings, but the formation of human consciousness itself. Part the third. Anunnaki, those who came from the sky. When kingship descended from heaven, it began in Eridu, the Sumerian King List. Across all ancient civilizations, there comes a moment when humankind looks up at the sky and asks, "Where do we come from?" For the Sumerians, the answer was carved clearly upon clay tablets. Kingship descended from heaven, a phrase both simple and staggering, speaking not only of the transmission of rule, but of the origin of order, of consciousness, of humanity itself. Eridu, the first city where kingship descended, was not merely the beginning of civilization, but the meeting point between heaven and earth, between gods and men. And within the cosmic imagination of the Sumerians, those beings from the sky had a name, Anunnaki, the divine descent, when heaven gave birth to order. In the Sumerian tongue, Anunnaki can be understood as those who came from Anu, the children of Anu, the god of the heavens. But over time, the concept transcended religion, becoming a symbol of divine intervention in the story of humankind. Carl Jung once said, "The gods have become diseases. Zeus, no longer, rules Olympus, but rather the solar plexus and the mind of man." He meant that the ancient gods never truly vanished. They simply moved from the outer sky into the inner cosmos of the human mind. Thus, when the Sumerians declared that kingship descended from heaven, perhaps they were describing not a physical descent but a collective awakening of the human spirit, the moment when humankind first sensed order, power, and divinity. Archetypes of kingship that Jung believed lived deep within the collective unconscious. And yet, from another perspective, many scholars, notably Zecharia Sitchin, believed the phrase was not a metaphor at all. They claimed that beings quite literally came from the sky, the very ones the Sumerians called Anunnaki, the Zecharia Sitchin hypothesis. When myth meets the cosmos. In his influential work, The 12th Planet, 1976, Zecharia Sitchin proposed a bold hypothesis. The Anunnaki were not gods, but extraterrestrial beings from a distant planet called Nibiru, whose vast orbit brought it near Earth only once every few millennia. According to Sitchin, these beings descended upon Mesopotamia, in what is now modern-day Iraq, and intervened in the evolutionary path of humanity. He suggested that the Anunnaki created Homo sapiens by combining their own DNA with that of Earth's native species, fashioning a new creature, intelligent yet obedient, to serve them in mining precious resources, especially gold, which they used to stabilize the atmosphere of their home world. Controversial though it may be, Sitchin's theory raises a profound question, one that Jung himself might have found familiar. Could these beings from the sky exist not only beyond the stars, but also within the human psyche? Archetypes from the sky. When the Anunnaki reflect the unconscious. In Man and His Symbols, Carl Jung wrote, "Myth is the natural language of the unconscious," meaning that what we call myth is often the way the collective unconscious narrates itself. If the Anunnaki are those who came from the sky, then perhaps they arrived not from the physical heavens, but from the inner heavens of consciousness, symbols of the divine archetypes perceived by ancient humanity. Their arrival, in the symbolic sense, marks the moment. Humankind awoke from pure instinct, beginning to understand order, power, morality, and even immortality. Kingship descended from heaven need not describe silver ships gleaming over the Mesopotamian horizon, but rather the birth of sacred awareness within humankind. The awakening to something higher, to an order that transcends the physical self. From that moment came kings, temples, and rituals, the outward expressions of an inner transformation. Between heaven and earth, the semi-divine kings. Whether read literally or symbolically, The Sumerian King List clearly describes rulers who were not entirely human. They were half-divine, bridges between the Anunnaki and mankind. They ruled for tens of thousands of years not because they were immortal, but because their archetype, the divine kingship, lived on eternally within the human psyche. From Ululim and Alalgar to Enmendurana, the one said to be taken up to heaven, each embodies a stage of spiritual evolution, the gradual union of human consciousness with the celestial realm. In Jungian depth psychology, these kings symbolize the self, the archetype of wholeness, the image of perfection toward which every soul strives. They ruled not merely over cities, but over the mind itself, living emblems of eternal order and divine strength. The hidden message, a whisper from the cosmos. If we return to the ancient inscription, when kingship descended from heaven, it began in Eridu. We may hear a resonance deeper than religion. Eridu was not only the first city of humankind, but the first state of consciousness, where kingship symbolized wisdom, order, and awareness descending from the highest plane of spirit. Perhaps the Sumerians were describing the first meeting between humanity and the divine, or the moment humankind realized it had always been part of the divine itself. Carl Jung once wrote, "The gods have become our diseases, but they can also be our healing." Maybe the Anunnaki, however we interpret them, represent the sacred origin of humanity, beings or memories, that planted the first seed of consciousness in the soil of our souls. The cosmic mirror. When the sky reflects the soul. Thus, the question, who created humankind, is no longer merely scientific or archaeological. It becomes spiritual, a mirror held up to the depths of our being. If the Anunnaki truly came from Nibiru, they may well be our cosmic ancestors. But if they are symbols, they remain the divine essence within us, the part that descended from heaven into the human mind to awaken knowledge. And so, each time we gaze upon the night sky, we do not only see the stars, we see the ancient memory of humanity, the time when gods and men still spoke the same language. Conclusion. Whisper of the gods. Between myth and reality, the Anunnaki endure as one of the most powerful symbols in human history. They may be gods, cosmic travelers, or metaphors for the awakening of consciousness itself. Carl Jung once wrote in Answer to Job, "The gods are within us. It is we who must awaken them." And perhaps when the Sumerians inscribed the words, "Kingship descended from heaven," they were not recording a celestial event, but leaving behind a message from the universe, that within each of us, a fragment of the Anunnaki still sleeps, waiting to awaken. Part 4. Each king and city. They ruled not merely over lands, but over the dreams of mankind. When reading the Sumerian King List, it's easy to be swept up by the colossal numbers. 2,800 years, $36,000. Years, 43,200 years. Yet behind those figures stand vivid symbols, the first 8 kings of humanity, each representing a stage in the evolution of consciousness, a deep layer within the collective dream that Carl Jung called the collective unconscious. If we regard the Anunnaki as those who sowed the seeds of order, then these 8 kings were the guardians of that seed. They ruled not only cities, but the minds of ancient people. Each city, each king is an archetype, mirroring a phase in the journey from instinct to self-awareness. Ululim of Eridu, the dawn of kingship. Eridu, the first city, set where 2 rivers meet, was regarded by the Sumerians as the cradle of humanity. Here, kingship descended from heaven, and Ululim became the first king, reigning 28,800 years. But Ululim was more than a man. He is the symbol of the birth of order, the moment humankind first realized it could organize, lead, and create. Jung calls this the stage of the emergence of consciousness from chaos. In the primordial darkness, Ululim lit the first flame of awareness, a spark of order. Thus, Eridu was not only the first city on earth, but the first city within the human mind. Alalgar of Eridu, the keeper of ritual. After Ululim came Alalgar, who solidified kingship through ritual and tradition. If Ululim symbolizes beginnings, Alalgar symbolizes formation, the moment humans learn to re-establish order through ceremony. Carl Jung once said, "Ritual is the drama of the soul, enacted in time to remind man of eternity." Alalgar forged rituals to remind people that power does not belong to an individual, but serves as a bridge between human and divine. With 36,000 years of reign, Alalgar embodies the age of faith, when humanity recognized that sustaining order requires reverence for what lies beyond the self. Enmenluana of Bad Tibara, the age of fire and metal. From Eridu, kingship moved to Bad Tibara, the city of forges, where Enmenluana ruled for 43,200 years. This is the era of fire, creativity, and metallurgy, a symbol of transformation in both matter and spirit. Fire in Enmenluana's hands did more than melt metal. It refined the soul. Jung wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." Metallurgy becomes a spiritual metaphor, a process of enduring and burning away the old ego to become more essential. In Sumerian consciousness, Bad Tibara is the city of transformation, where divinity tempers humankind like a blade, to be strong yet bow before the sacred flame. Enmengalana of Bad Tibira, the guardian of me. After Enmenluana came Enmengalana, also reigning in Bad Tibira. He is called the keeper of the me. The cosmic ordinances, the codes of civilization the Sumerians believed were bestowed by the gods. If Enmenluana taught humans to shape matter, Enmengalana taught them to understand the order of the soul. The me are the laws of heaven and earth, the hidden rhythm binding everything, from ritual and music to ethics and knowledge. Jung might say this was the age when archetypes began to shape humanity, when the collective unconscious acquired structure. Enmengalana inscribed that invisible order, turning the cosmos into a song with rules. Dumuzid the shepherd, the eternal cycle. From Bad Tibira, kingship moved to Dumuzid, the shepherd king. His name echoes through later cultures, Tammuz in Babylon, Adonis in Greece, forever linked to the cycles of seasons, death, and rebirth. Dumuzid symbolizes love, sacrifice, and the renewal of nature. When he dies, the earth grows dry. When he returns, spring awakens. Jung wrote, "Every death is followed by rebirth, for that is the law of the psyche." Dumuzid ruled not only people, but their deepest feelings, the faith that loss is but a part of the cycle of return. He is the king who taught humanity the meaning of suffering. Only by losing do we learn to cherish life. Ensipad Zid Ana of Larak, the silent king lesser known is Ensipad Zid Ana, the silent king of Larak, a city that, to this day, archaeology has yet to clearly uncover. Perhaps Larak exists only in spirit, a city of silence, where humans learn to listen to what cannot be spoken. Jung calls this the stage of introversion, when the mind turns inward to explore shadow and ego. Ensipad Zidana is the king of interiority, of stillness. He needs neither war nor ceremony, for the greatest truths arrive in silence. His 800-year reign symbolizes humanity's vast journey of meditation, the time when we first learned to hear the voice of the soul. Enmendur Ana of Sippar. The prophet who ascended with Enmendur Ana, we meet the silhouette of Enoch from the Bible. And Enoch walked with God, then he was no more, because God took him. The Sumerians wrote that Enmendur Ana was taken up to heaven, becoming a symbol of prophet and the union of human and divine. He ruled Sippar, the city of light, where people first lifted their eyes to the sky, not just to petition, but to understand. Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." Enmendur Ana embodies the human reaching the self, the soul's wholeness. He no longer needs to rule, for he is the light itself, a symbol of knowledge and inner illumination. Ubara Tutu of Shurupak. The last before the flood. At last comes Ubara Tutu, king of Shurupak, regarded as the final ruler before the great flood. He is the father of Utnapishtim, the counterpart to Noah in the Epic of Gilgamesh. Ubara-Tutu reigned 18,600 years, the final golden age before the waters swept all away. He symbolizes the decline of ancient consciousness, the moment when humanity lost its connection with heaven and entered a new cycle. Carl Jung said, "The greatest tragedy of mankind is that we forget what we once knew." With Ubara-Tutu, humanity forgets the kingship from heaven, and the deluge becomes a metaphor for the surge of the unconscious, erasing that sacred memory. Conclusion: the kings of memory. The 8 Sumerian kings are not merely names on a list, but phases of the human soul. From Ululim to Ubara-Tutu, from Genesis to decline, they recount the cycle of consciousness, from the moment humans recognized themselves to the moment they forgot. As Carl Jung wrote in Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious, the symbols of the unconscious are the eternal guardians of the human spirit. These kings are those immortal symbols, ruling not upon thrones, but within our collective unconscious. And when we speak their names, we awaken that ancient part within ourselves. The part that still remembers the flame of Eridu, the sound of Bad Tibira, and the light of Sipar. Where humans and gods once walked together beneath one sky. Part 5, the Great Flood, the border between two worlds. Then the flood swept over. The Sumerian King List, just 7 words, etched onto a small clay tablet, yet they carry the weight of a universe. Then the flood swept over. A short, cold, emotionless sentence, like the final breath of a world that had existed for hundreds of thousands of years. With those words, the Sumerian King List records not only a geological cataclysm, but a metaphysical event. The boundary between two epochs, the divine and the mortal, the mythical and the historical, the immortal and the finite. The waters of forgetfulness. When water becomes memory. In the myths of every civilization, water is the symbol of both rebirth and forgetfulness. It destroys and purifies, erasing the old to make way for the new. Mircea Eliade, in The Myth of the Eternal Return, wrote, "Water symbolizes the totality of possibilities. It precedes every form and sustains every creation." When the Great Flood swept across the world, it washed away not only cities, but the memory of a divine age, a time when humans lived alongside gods. After the flood, the world was cleansed, but diminished. Lifespans shortened. The reigns of kings grew brief. Immortality, once the nature of humankind, became a distant echo in myth. It was as though the waters erased not only the earth, but also the sacred memory within the human mind. The fall from eternity, when humanity became mortal. After the line, "Then the flood swept over," the King List continues in its dry, administrative tone. After the flood had swept over, kingship was lowered from heaven again. A small detail, yet profoundly haunting. Kingship descended once more, but no longer as the eternal light it once was. Now, heaven was distant, veiled, its brilliance dimmed behind the curtain of time. Graham Hancock, in Fingerprints of the Gods, asked, "Is it possible that civilization itself is a memory, carried through the flood by a handful of survivors? Perhaps humanity survived, but forgot who it was. They carried with them fragments of ancient knowledge, astronomy, architecture, language, but lost the awareness of immortality, the sense of belonging to a divine cosmos. From that moment on, humankind no longer ruled with heaven, but learned to live within limits. They discovered aging, sickness, and death, and thus began the long journey to rediscover what was lost. The universal memory of the flood. The wonder is this: every civilization remembers the flood, from Noah in Genesis to Utnapishtim in the Epic of Gilgamesh, to Atrahasis in Babylonian myth, and Manu in Hindu tradition. They all tell the same story: an ancient world submerged, a chosen one who preserves life, a new beginning after the waters recede. Joseph Campbell, in The Hero with 1,000 Faces, wrote, "The flood is the archetype of transformation. The world must be destroyed before it can be renewed." To Campbell, the flood was not a disaster, but a cosmic initiation, the world's own rite of passage. Just as the soul must suffer to be reborn, so too must the world die before it can live again. And in every version, from Sumer to Israel, from India to Greece, there is always the one chosen figure, the keeper of memory. Noah, Utnapishtim, Atrahasis. They survived not only in body, but as guardians of humanity's soul, the flood as psychological symbol. Through the lens of symbolic psychology, the Great Flood is more than a natural event. It is the inundation of the unconscious. Jung once described the flood as a symbol of the inundation of consciousness by the unconscious. The waters represent the rising tide of the unconscious, when primal instincts, forgotten memories, and ancient fears surge upward, sweeping away the fragile structures of reason. When the waters recede, consciousness rebuilds, smaller, more human, but farther from the divine. It is the process of humanization, the moment when humankind steps out from the realm of gods and becomes itself. Thus, the flood marks a painful awakening, when humanity trades eternity for freedom. The dual nature of the flood, destruction and rebirth. In every culture, water bears a dual nature, to destroy and to create. Mircea Eliade wrote, "Immersion in water symbolizes a return to the preformal. Emerging from it is a repetition of the act of creation. The flood is a return to the void, so that the world might be made anew. Like one falling into a deep dream, losing the ego, yet awakening more aware, humanity, after the flood, emerged transformed. No longer the immortal race of the Anunnaki age, but beings haunted by a vague memory of the divine. And it was this very memory that drove them to rebuild temples, writing, religion, history. Graham Hancock once said, "We are a species with amnesia." Perhaps the Great Flood was the beginning of that collective, forgetting, the moment when humanity forgot what it once was and began its long quest to remember. Through the civilizations that followed. The silence. After the storm, when the waters withdrew, the earth was silent. No thunder, no descending gods, only the hollow sound of wind over ruins. Yet within that silence, something new was born. An awareness of death, of finitude, and through it, the meaning of life itself. Mircea Eliade wrote, "Every flood is a new Genesis." Indeed, the world after the waters was not a continuation, but a new world altogether. From this silence, humankind learned to fear, to worship, to record, and to dream of what had been lost. The stillness after the storm was the moment history began. Conclusion: the border between heaven and earth. Then the flood swept over. Those 7 words divided everything, the world of eternal kings and that of mortal men, myth and history, heaven and earth. But between these two realms remains a fragile bridge. Memory. The memory of a time when humans once lived with the gods. And perhaps it is this memory that compels us to keep searching, to keep telling stories like the Sumerian King List. Because deep within our souls, we can still hear the faint sound of distant waters, the echo of a flood that divided the worlds and gave birth to us all. Part 6. Gilgamesh. The bridge between myth and history. He who saw the deep, the foundation of the world, who knew wisdom in all things. The Epic of Gilgamesh. After the Great Flood, when the earth still smelled of mud and ash, a new era began. The world had changed. Kings no longer reigned for tens of thousands of years, and gods no longer walked among men. And between those two worlds, a name emerged, Gilgamesh, the king of Uruk, the one seen as a bridge between myth and history. According to the Sumerian King List, he ruled for 126 years, longer than any mortal king, yet still fleeting compared to the eternal dynasties before the flood. Thus, Gilgamesh stands as a symbol of transition, a time when divine kingship had withdrawn, but the shadow of the god still lingered in the human mind. The half-god, half-man Gilgamesh, was not entirely human, but no longer divine. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, he is described as 2/3 god and 1/3 man. This mixture made him the embodiment of the human tragedy, bearing the memory of the divine, yet trapped in the frailty of flesh. Joseph Campbell once called him the first hero of the Western imagination, for he was the first to defy destiny, the first to confront the great question: can a human being conquer death? Gilgamesh was the echo of the Anunnaki age, but also the prototype of humankind. Within him lived the eternal conflict, the longing to ascend to heaven, and the sorrow of being bound to earth. The quest for immortality. After the death of his beloved friend Enkidu, Gilgamesh was consumed by the terror of mortality. He abandoned Uruk, wandering through deserts and darkness, seeking Utnapishtim, the one man who had survived the flood and been granted eternal life by the gods. His journey was not merely that of a king, but of all humanity. The timeless quest of consciousness, confronting its limits. Graham Hancock once wrote in Magicians of the Gods, "We are a species haunted by the memory of eternity." Gilgamesh is that haunting made flesh, the memory of immortality lost, which humanity continues to chase through religion, philosophy, and science. He crossed mountains of fire and seas of death, met immortal beings and goddesses of wisdom and decay. But when he finally found the herb of life, a serpent stole it from him, as if the universe itself whispered. Immortality does not belong to man. The symbolism of the serpent. The serpent's theft of the herb seems a small event, yet it carries a cosmic meaning. Across civilizations, the serpent represents rebirth, shedding its skin to renew itself, symbolizing transformation, not permanence. Mircea Eliade called this the sacred paradox of renewal. True immortality does not mean to live forever, but to be reborn endlessly. In soul, in memory, in knowledge. Gilgamesh failed to gain eternal life, but he was reborn in the human imagination. The Epic of Gilgamesh itself is his immortality, a song retold for over 4 millennia, keeping his name alive in the collective unconscious. The psychological bridge, through the lens of Jungian psychology, Gilgamesh is not only a historical figure but an archetype. The seeker, the one who dares to ask the impossible question. Carl Jung described this path as the process of individuation, the soul's journey from darkness to light, from unconsciousness to self-awareness. In that sense, Gilgamesh is the first awakening man, the one who realized that the gods were gone and that humanity must find its own way home. When he returned to Uruk, empty-handed, weary, and aged, he was no longer the proud king. But in his eyes shone a quiet wisdom. He said, "Look at the walls of Uruk. These are the works of men." A simple line. Yet it marks a revolution, the dawn of the human age, the humanization of the divine. In Gilgamesh, the divine was no longer a voice from the sky, but a whisper within. He found not eternal life in the heavens, but meaning in mortal existence. Historian Will Durant wrote in The Story of Civilization, "Man became human when he accepted death, and sought not eternity, but purpose." That is the subtle message of Gilgamesh, that the value of life lies not in its length, but in its depth. Through his journey, the god within him faded, but the human was born. And thus Gilgamesh became the final bridge between the world of the gods and the world of men. The legacy of Gilgamesh today, archaeologists have uncovered clay tablets, inscribed with his epic, in Nineveh, Uruk, and Babylon, the oldest written story known to humankind. Those trembling cuneiform lines are the first voice of human consciousness, recording fear, longing, and pride, the cry of a being aware of itself. Anthropologist Jean Bottero once wrote, "In Gilgamesh, mankind recognizes its reflection for the first time." When we read his story, we are not reading about an ancient king. We are looking into a mirror. Gilgamesh failed to claim eternal life, but he triumphed on another level. becoming the eternal symbol of the human soul's longing, of our endless search for the sacred in a world that has forgotten it. Conclusion. The echo between heaven and earth. Gilgamesh is the final echo of the Anunnaki age and the first call of humankind. Within him, eternity and mortality converge, divinity and humanity meet, not in the heavens but in the awakening mind. He did not find eternal life, but he awakened the meaning of death. And perhaps that is true immortality. For every time we speak his name, Gilgamesh, he lives again, in story, in dream, and in the hearts of those still searching for something beyond themselves. Part 7. Genetic Legacy and Global Myth. We are not only children of the earth, we are heirs to the memory of the stars. Since history was first written, humanity has remembered the ages of kings who lived for hundreds, even thousands of years, figures who seemed to stand on the threshold between gods and men. Not only in Sumer. In the Bible, Adam lived 930 years, Seth 912, and Noah 950. In Egypt, the god Thoth, giver of writing to humankind, is said to have lived through thousands of lunar cycles. In India's Rig Veda, Manu, the survivor of the Great Flood, is described as immortal in the memory of Brahman. Though told in different tongues, these stories share the same rhythm, the memory of an age when humans lived for extraordinary spans in intimate closeness with the gods. The echo of longevity. Why do civilizations separated by oceans of space and culture share a single motif? Patriarchs, sages, and kings who live for astonishingly long lives? Is this merely a coincidence of imagination or a true memory preserved across hundreds of generations? The anthropologist Mircea Eliade, in Myth and Reality, wrote, "Myth is not a lie about the past. It is the memory of what humanity once experienced in a different mode of being." According to Eliade, myth is not fabrication, but memory told in symbols. Memory of a different state of existence. When humans perceived time, space, and life in ways unlike our own. Perhaps when the Sumerians say Alulim lived 28,800 years, or when the Bible says Methuselah lived 969, they are not speaking of biological lifespan, but of the lifetime of collective memory. Long cycles of sacred consciousness enduring within humanity's unconscious. The genetic memory. Modern science, while rejecting immortal kings, is opening new doors to understand what the ancients intended. Geneticists have found evidence that Homo sapiens may have emerged over 300,000 years ago, far earlier than once thought. Within our DNA, each of us carries fragments of our ancestors, not only in body but in behaviors, instincts, and latent memories. Biologist Rupert Sheldrake calls this morphic resonance. The past is not gone. It resonates in the present through patterns that life repeats unconsciously. In other words, the past does not vanish. It vibrates within the present, through genes, through psychology, through the very ways we dream and tell stories. If so, the memory of long-lived kings, of people who once lived in a sacred era, may still live within us as spiritual templates, archetypes sleeping in the DNA of the spirit. The global myth of long-lived ancestors. From east to west, every civilization speaks of the first generations, a time when humans were closer to the divine and lived longer, stronger, wiser. In China, the Yellow Emperor Zhuanyuan is said to have lived over 100 years and ascended to the heavens on a dragon after completing the Great Way. In South America, the god Viracocha taught humans to build cities, then vanished into the sea, immortal with the mist. In Greece, the heroes of the Golden Age, Kronos, Prometheus, endured for thousands of years before the age of men began. As Joseph Campbell notes in The Masks of God, these tales testify to an ancient shared language of the human psyche, where symbols cross cultural borders to tell a single story that we were once more than we are now. The loss of the Golden Age. Perhaps the age of immortal kings did not truly end, but sank, buried in the deep layers of human memory, like embers smoldering beneath ash. When humankind lost its communion with heaven, it lost a sacred mode of awareness. and with it, the sense of expanded time. Researcher Graham Hancock in Underworld suggests, perhaps the flood that ended the Golden Age was not only of water, but of amnesia. Symbolically, the Great Flood was a wave of forgetting, when divine consciousness was submerged and humanity had to live in a linear world where time has a beginning and an end. From then on, lifespan shortened, yet the idea of eternity continued to echo in the mind. We kept remembering, not with logic, but through stories, dreams, and symbols of immortal ancestors. The memory that breathes through myth. If myth is the spiritual genome of humanity, then every tale of long-lived beings is an ancient gene, a fragment of ancestral memory still active in our souls. When we retell the stories of Adam, Noah, or Thoth, we reactivate humanity's genetic memory, what Jung called the collective unconscious. On a deeper level, perhaps these stories are history itself, told in symbolic language. Perhaps there once existed an older, more advanced people, semi-divine, descendants of the Anunnaki, or simply a prior humankind, who lived longer, knew more, and then vanished in the flood of time. Whether we trust in myth or in DNA, the result is the same. We are the descendants of memory. The science of the soul today. Science is closer than ever to showing that memory can outlive a single lifetime. Genetic experiments indicate that certain emotional responses, such as fear of a smell or recognition of a shape, can be transmitted across multiple generations of mice without relearning. If this is true for animals, why not for humans? Might our nostalgia for immortal kings and a golden age be a hereditary memory encoded in DNA and awakened by myth and religion? As Rupert Sheldrake writes, what we call imagination may be the mind's way of remembering things that the body already knows. Perhaps when we hear the stories of Adam, of Sumer, of kings who lived 40,000 years, our hearts tremble not from curiosity, but because they are remembering what the soul once knew. Conclusion. The blood of memory. Looking back across the ancient world, from Sumer to Egypt, from India to the Andes, we can trace a single current of memory, an invisible legacy flowing in our blood, in our genes, and in the shared dreams of humankind. Perhaps the immortal kings never truly left us. They simply concealed themselves within the DNA of memory, in the deepest part of the collective unconscious, waiting to be told again. As Joseph Campbell wrote, myths are public dreams, dreams are private myths. And each time we listen to a myth, we awaken humanity's genetic memory, the memory that we are not only children of the earth, but children of the sky, bearing in our veins the legacy of ancient kings. Pardon my unanswered questions. The most beautiful thing we can experience is the mysterious. Albert Einstein. When the dust of ancient civilizations has long settled, only silent clay tablets remain in the dark. Lines etched by hands now turn to ash, still whispering of a world beyond our understanding. The Sumerian King List may appear to be no more than an administrative record, a ledger of kings and reigns. But if we read more closely, we sense something that does not belong to time. A rhythm of memory, a murmur from a forgotten age, reminding us that there are chapters of human history we have never yet read. Is it history or myth? The first and perhaps most important question is this: was the Sumerian King List history? Archaeologist Thorkild Jacobsen once called it a chronicle blending fact and symbol. Some of the kings, Gilgamesh, Etana, and Merkar, did exist in archaeological sites, yet the reigns, tens of thousands of years, stretch beyond all biological sense. Perhaps, as some scholars suggest, these are not physical years, but cosmic cycles, written in the language of the gods. Maybe 800 years is not the lifespan of a man, but the heartbeat of a civilization, encoded in the sacred number Sar, 3,600 years, the unit of divine time. As Mircea Eliade wrote, myth speaks of a time that is both historical and sacred, where every event is also an archetype. Myth does not deny history. It projects it into the dimension of the sacred, preserving meanings that outlast the literal. Thus, perhaps the question, was it real? matters less than why did our ancestors tell this story. For sometimes, that which is not fact touches the deeper truth. Did they truly live for tens of thousands of years? The numbers in the Sumerian King List, 36,000, 43,200, 28,800 years, are staggering. Could this have been a way to express the profound difference between eras of existence? Perhaps these years were not measured by the sun, but by divine time, where a single moment may last a millennium. In many traditions, gods and humans inhabit two forms of time. The Greeks called them chronos, physical time, and kairos, sacred time. The Sumerians may have written in kairos, not in our chronos. Yet some researchers, like Zecharia Sitchin, believe the numbers were literal. The lifespans of hybrid beings, descendants of the Anunnaki and humankind, those who bore the blood of the stars. If the Anunnaki came from a world whose orbit was thousands of Earth years long, then 1 year for them could indeed equal millennia for us. And thus, a reign of 36,000 years might describe a single Anunnaki lifetime. This question opens not proof, but possibility. That perhaps our biological limits are not absolute, but remnants of a shortened cycle after the flood when kingship was no longer from heaven. Are we the children of the gods? The third, and most unsettling, question, are we the descendants of the gods? Science cannot confirm this, yet neither can it fully dismiss the possibility of intervention in our evolution. Genetic studies have revealed fragments of DNA with no known origin, neither Neanderthal nor Denisovan, mysterious signatures embedded within us. Sitchin believed these were the biological remnants of the Anunnaki, the living memory of an ancient hybrid creation. He wrote, "We are not gods, but we are not mere animals either. We are the offspring of both." Whether one accepts this or not, it remains undeniable that humanity alone dreams of the stars. We not only exist, we yearn, create, worship, remember home we have never seen. That longing itself may be the subtlest evidence of our dual origin, part earth, part heaven. The threshold of knowing these questions, whether answered or not, remain as open doors into infinity. Perhaps we will never find Nibiru nor prove the Anunnaki's existence. But the value of the mystery lies not in resolution but in the mirror it holds to our own search. As Carl Sagan once said, somewhere, something incredible is waiting to be known. Every civilization leaves a mirror behind so that humanity may gaze into it and ask, who are we? Where do we come from? And what part of our memory is not of this earth? Between faith and wonder, perhaps the truest path is not to choose between belief and disbelief, but to preserve our sense of awe. When we look up at the night sky, at stars glittering like ancient gold, we see the same heavens the Sumerians once saw, the same sky that reflected upon the faces of the immortal kings. And perhaps in that moment we are connected to them, not by reason, but by memory of the soul. As Joseph Campbell wrote, the goal of life is to make our heartbeat match the beat of the universe, to match our nature with nature. When our rhythm aligns with the cosmos, questions dissolve, for we become part of the very mystery we seek. Conclusion. The silence. Between the stars. The Sumerian King List still rests in the Museum of Baghdad, a small clay tablet bearing the weight of eternity. On it, 8 kings reigned for 241 years, and then one short line. Then the flood swept over. Amid the numbers, theories, and beliefs, one truth endures. Humanity is still trying to remember. Remembering a time when we did not fear death, when we were not separate from the cosmos, when we did not ask why, because we were part of the story itself. Perhaps the truth does not lie in ancient tablets, but in the thirst for knowledge that makes us lift our eyes to the stars. And maybe, out there, the old gods, the Anunnaki, or whatever name we give them, still watch us, smiling. Not because they have left, but because they live on. In the very question we have never stopped asking, Part X, Summary. Time is not a line, but a living circle, breathing, fading, returning. When the winds of time finally fall silent, we find ourselves standing before a cracked clay tablet bearing the name, the Sumerian King List. The symbols etched upon it have endured millennia of dust and wind, yet still they whisper in the dark, of kings who reigned for 200 years, of the great flood that swept the world clean, and of an age when gods and humans walked the earth together. At first glance, it is merely a record, but when we listen deeply, we sense something more. The list of kings is not just history, it is a mirror of memory, a reflection of humanity's distant recollection. A memory we no longer remember, yet still carry within us. Like an ancient bloodstream flowing quietly beneath our modern skin. The mirror of memory. When humankind writes history, it believes it is telling of the past, but perhaps each civilization is simply gazing into the mirror of cosmic memory. The Sumerians saw in their kings the image of heavenly order. The Egyptians recorded the rise and fall of dynasties like the ebb and flow of the Nile. The Greeks spoke of the ages of gold, silver, and bronze, the breathing rhythm of the world's soul. They did not write linear history. As we do today, they wrote in cycles, in spirals of existence. And within those spirals, every return is a new beginning. As Mircea Eliade wrote, the eternal return is the nostalgia of humanity to recover the sacred time of origins. Each time we tell an ancient story, each time we remember a forgotten king, we return for a brief moment to that sacred dawn when humanity still knew itself as part of a living universe. The spiral of time. History, as we know it, is not a straight path from past to present. It is a vast spiral where civilizations rise and fall, only to return in new forms. The Sumerians are gone, yet their vision of divine order still breathes through every religion, every empire, every dream of sacred kingship. They vanished into the desert winds, but their language, cuneiform, remains the first imprint of human consciousness seeking eternity. Philosopher Heraclitus once said, "The way up and the way down are one and the same." In that spiral, destruction and creation are not opposites. They are two sides of the same breath, just as the Great Flood was both a catastrophe and a beginning. So too, each time we forget, history creates another flood to make us remember. The breath of civilizations. Imagine history as the breath of the cosmos. Each civilization is an inhale, radiant, creative, alive, and then an exhale, dissolving into silence, making room for the next breath. The Sumerians, the Egyptians, the Maya, the Greeks, all were breaths of the same soul. They did not perish. They transformed. They live on in language, in memory, in the very stories we tell tonight. When we speak of Alulim, Gilgamesh, or the Anunnaki, we awaken the sleeping cells of cosmic memory within humanity's collective soul. And in that instant, past and present are no longer separate. They merge, like dream and remembrance. The poetic truth. Perhaps the Sumerian King List is not literal history, but it holds the truth of the soul. What Carl Jung called the symbolic truth that nourishes the psyche. It reminds us that history is written not only in stone but in metaphor, that what humans believe, they become. And that sometimes myth is the soul's way of finding its path home. As Joseph Campbell wrote in The Power of Me, myth is the secret opening through which the inexhaustible energies of the cosmos pour into human manifestation. Each time we tell an ancient myth, we reopen that secret door, the bridge between man and the universe. And in that moment, past, present, and future fuse into one, like light dissolving into breath. The sleep of eternity. Now, as night descends and time melts away like sand through glass, let our minds grow quiet. Let the story of the ancient kings fade into stillness, a lullaby from 200 years ago. For in the end, all of it, the gods of Nibiru, the immortal dynasties, the great flood, is the universe telling its own story in a language we call myth. Perhaps it is all symbolic. Yet within the symbol we can feel the pulse of something greater than ourselves. A breath, a light, a call to return home. Epilogue, the stars. Remember, someday, when humankind looks up at the star-filled sky, we will no longer ask whether the Anunnaki were real, or whether the ancient kings truly lived for 43,200 years, because that question will no longer matter. What will matter is this, that in the light of those stars, we recognize ourselves. Those points of light, like the symbols on Sumerian clay, are the universe's memory of us. And when we close our eyes, listening to the distant melody of history, we understand. We are not merely children of time, but bearers of eternity's memory. Like an infinite spiral, like the breath of the stars, like the lullaby of ancient kings, still softly whispering, then the flood swept over, and the story began again.